there is a research paper that got published recently, and I'm going to tell you the headline right away. In 2024, according to this research, Christian leaders around the world are going to embezzle, steal, an estimated $86 billion from their followers. That's what this came down to. And this is called ecclesiastical crime, according to the researchers. They said it'll jump to $390 billion by 2050. So this is research that was done by 3 researchers at the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, which is part of the Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary. And the numbers are tucked away in a research paper. I would show it to you, but it's not available for public viewing. But I will point you to a watchdog group called the Trinity Foundation, because they just posted an article about this. They monitor like how Christian leaders spend money, and they're really good at what they do. But this is their headline: Christian religious leaders to embezzle 86 billion in 2024. Look at this line right here. Here's what ecclesiastical crime means. It takes on many forms, such as skimming from an offering plate, restricted donation fraud, where you say, you're donating money for a mission trip, but then they divert it to their personal expense account, and international cash smuggling. Televangelists have transferred funds across international borders on private jets and failed to report those transactions, resulting in bulk cash smuggling. So that right there is just wild. That's what type of money laundering we're talking about here. And we know this sort of thing occurs. I think just a couple of weeks ago, I talked about a Christian couple that was arrested for like crypto crimes. Like they told people to give them money to invest in some sort of cryptocurrency, and then it turned out to be a scam. And here's the thing about Christian crimes, financial crimes. It's really hard to pinpoint how much crime occurs under the veil of Christianity. And that can be blamed on everything from the fact that churches don't have to file financial reports with the IRS, to the fact that they would blame crime on everything but religion, to the fact that if something does happen in your church and someone stole thousands of dollars from your church, you may not want to say that out loud. You may want to keep that on the DL so no one finds out about it. It's kind of like tracking sales in a black market. All you're ever going to get are estimates, because you literally can't keep track of what's happening. That's why it's called a black market. You know what I mean? So how did they figure this out? Well, several years ago, these researchers, and I can show you this, several years ago, these same researchers put out a paper where they tried to figure all this out. Their paper was called Embezzlement in the Global Christian Community. And in this article, this is from 2015, one of the things they pointed out, and I'm going to scroll over to Sci-Hub here and get a copy of this paper. One of the things they pointed out in the paper, here we go. This is the part I want to show you. Let me zoom in. There we go. Sorry, I'm trying to make this bigger so you can all see it. Nonprofit, here we go, on the left side here. Nonprofit organizations, especially those that begin as small, there we go, under-resourced, volunteer-run organizations, face even tougher challenges in combating financial fraud, because they often focus on their mission rather than strong administrative practices. A neglect of financial concerns can easily result. This neglect can be exacerbated when they enjoy tax-exempt status, as in the United States. Nonprofits also tend to be more trusting of their employees, assuming that they share the organization's philanthropic goals. And I only point that out to say, churches are really bad at catching these crimes, because most churches are not like Kenneth Copeland Ministries. You know what I mean? They're small churches, handful of employees at most. Most of those people are not experts in financial anything. They're just trying to do their job to help their church. So it's really easy for someone to do bad things. It's really easy to not know that someone's stealing money from you because of that. So here's what these researchers did in this paper. They looked at data compiled by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, which found that in the US economy, we lose approximately 6% of our gross domestic product, our GDP, to fraud each year. Like, of all the money the US makes every year, we lose about 6% of it to fraud. That's according to a secular organization that studies fraud. And by using that metric, they applied it to how much money Christians give to their ministries, churches around the world. And this is what they found here. I'm going to share this with you if I can pull this up. Here we go. Check out this. Here's what they just compiled. This is back in 2015 when they did the embezzlement thing. You could see at the top row, they're looking at different parts of the world, how much money people gave to various causes. But look at this, actual giving by Christians. And look at the left side. How much did they give to all causes? How much did Christians donate to charity? How much did they give to secular causes? How much did they give to Christian causes? And if I scroll to the total all the way on the right, you could see at the top here, they gave, Christians in 2015 gave $850.9 billion to charity, and they gave $773.5 billion to Christian charities like their churches. So they gave a lot of money. Using that number, they said, well, what's 6% of that number? And they got about 50 billion. They're saying 50 billion in fraud. So here's what they did in their recent paper. And let me share this with you as well. In their recent paper, they say, well, let's look at Christianity now. And you could see again, look at the left side, the things here, personal income of Christians. How much are they giving to Christian causes? And how much is being stolen in fraud, ecclesiastical crime? Look at those last two rows. In 2024, these researchers said Christians are giving $1.3 trillion to Christian charities. And looking at the fraud estimates now, that's about 86 billion lost to fraud. That's where they're getting that number from. And look at their estimates for 2050. They say Christians will give $5.2 trillion to Christian charities, which means you're going to see about $390 billion in fraud stolen from those places. And I think it's worth mentioning, these researchers do not treat Christians with any different or special deference here. Like, they're basically saying financial fraud exists everywhere. Churches and ministries are no different. That's a very secular way of looking at the problem, and I appreciate that. In their paper, they also mention, I know one person is pointing out 8 billion in the comments there. I'm just pointing this out. 8 billion is not 10% of 270. You know what? I don't know where you're getting those numbers from, so I'm going to come back to that later. But I want to say the researchers also pointed out there are ways they could stop the fraud. Churches could do routine financial audits. They could have more transparency about how much money is coming in, how much is going out, and where it's going out to. They could have better training for their staff. They could have more oversight for any employee with access to church money. They could also get insurance coverage for fraud. They could take direct action if there are suspicions of criminal activity. The problem is that a lot of these churches are so small that they don't have the ability or desire to do any of these things. Because, like, when a little old granny is the person taking in the money every week, what are you going to do? Make her go through a financial training seminar? Probably not. A lot of churches, including mega churches, definitely don't do transparency. They don't let their own congregations know how much money is going out and how much the pastor is taking in and things like that. They're shady as hell when it comes to that stuff. And the IRS does not make them, they don't treat churches like other nonprofits where you have to tell them how much is coming in and going out. So churches are not going to be able to stop fraud entirely, but they could absolutely minimize it if they cared about this stuff the way larger companies did. A lot of the fraud, the researchers also mentioned, we're not talking about televangelists spending tithe money on private jets. We're talking largely about people with no criminal record who make relatively little money, but they absolutely have an intimate knowledge of how the organization works. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know how much they could steal and get away with. And that's usually what we're talking about here, because that adds up over time. They escape scrutiny. And when you consider how many hundreds of thousands of small churches there are, all convincing members to hand over cash, many of which have very little oversight into that money after it's collected, the potential for fraud is definitely there. The question is whether church leaders are willing to do anything to prevent that kind of financial abuse. It's up to them. Going to pause there for a second to get to any questions here, Den. Of course, church leaders take money. They don't have to show their books to anyone. I know it's one of the most frustrating things about the IRS. The fact that they treat churches and ministries with kid gloves. Like, it doesn't matter if they break the IRS rules. The IRS doesn't revoke their tax exempt status. If churches, specifically religious organizations, do not have to file the same paperwork as Planned Parenthood or even right wing nonprofit groups. Why? Because they're religious, so they get a pass, which they absolutely do not deserve and shouldn't have. But that makes it a lot easier to commit financial fraud in the religious world, because very few people are paying attention to the money, except the people who stand to benefit from it. They were the first numbers I saw. I hope. Oh, good. Oh, I gotcha. You're talking about the numbers I pulled up a second ago. Sorry, I'm not going to go back there right now, but I know you were not making up those numbers. I'd be curious if they could actually factor in coercion. Do you mean, Dan's backcountry? Do you mean coercion in terms of how people are giving money to their churches, or something totally different? I don't know. I don't know how you can measure coercion if you're just trying, when the information you have available is so opaque as it is. Trying to incorporate some of these variables that would have an impact, but I mean, it's hard enough to calculate this stuff as is. I don't know that you'd be able to get even more details, but I like that they're trying to study it. That's kind of nice.